I'm up here to make a speech, and I'm interested in the project. I first read about it years ago. From what I understand, you have people, libertarians. You call yourselves libertarians?
Yeah, libertarian has a couple of common meanings that people understand. There's the small L, you might say. You're probably familiar with the libertarian idea or the libertarian philosophy. And then there's a group called the Libertarian Party. We call big L, maybe libertarian. And the project is comprised of libertarians, small L libertarians. You might think of Goldwater conservatives, Jeffersonian Democrats, pro-freedom type of people. They like freedom. And we're those kinds of people.
But this word libertarian, people don't know what it means. They think it means maybe libertine, or
right.
People just don't
know.
know.
And there is a difference. Some people look at me, for example, and go, "You're not a libertarian because I don't smoke pot," and stuff like that. And they go, "Oh man, you're not out gambling every night. You're not a libertarian." And that's not what it's all about. The idea is not so much exercising every absurd freedom we can come up with. The idea is respecting individual liberty, liberty being the root of libertarian, the freedom to do as you please without interference from government.
So what's the project?
Well, the basic idea behind the project is to get 20,000 libertarians or pro-freedom activists to move to New Hampshire and work for smaller government, freer markets, and individual freedom.
Why 20,000?
Well, I did some research on this when I was a graduate student at Yale on how many activists you would need to actually win a majority in a small state. And I compared the U.S. to some other systems that were similar and came up with a ratio of 1 to 100. For every one activist to 100 people in the population, you can win a majority. So in New Hampshire, which has about 1.2 million, you could conceivably win a majority with as few as 12,000. We had a list of 10 low population states, all under 2 million population. And our research showed that 20,000 activists could conceivably win a majority in the political system in those states. And so we had a vote among those 10.
So, and these are states, Wyoming, Alaska, Rhode Island?
We actually tossed out Rhode Island because we thought it was so politically gone that there was no hope for it. But
Gone meaning?
It's too statist, if you will. It has too much of a political culture that's dominated by big government. And our view was that we just couldn't overcome that kind of barrier, even with 20,000 activists. We might as well choose a state that's already pro-freedom.
So you were picking from Alaska, Wyoming. I notice it tends to be not the warm states
That's right.
that are smaller.
Delaware was the only exception, really.
And why New Hampshire?
Well, New Hampshire won the vote among the 10 states we had, and I think there are a number of reasons for that. Varrin has some insight on that, having moved here already, but when people were voting, they considered the fact that in the continental U.S., New Hampshire has the lowest state and local taxes. It's got a culture of personal freedom, and that's evidenced by seemingly small things such as no seatbelt law for adults. It's your own responsibility to buckle up. There's no helmet law for motorcyclists. That, again, is your responsibility. So this general culture of both economic and personal freedom, I think, weighed heavily in people's minds.
A license plate that says live free or die.
That says it all, really.
And it kind of feels that way as somebody who's moved here. I'm formerly from California, which does not have the live free or die mentality.
What, you notice a difference when you make friends?
Absolutely.
Like
it's,
what?
It's almost like walking into a foreign country. It is so different at some points in time. I've had conversations with neighbors and friends and state legislators even that have surprised me with respect to how much they comprehend about freedom. Many of them, for example, are very well versed in the New Hampshire Constitution. I don't know if any of the California state legislators have even read it. But these people understand freedom, even the ordinary ones on the street, the ones who have not even been, say, schooled in it. When you say, well, New Hampshire is the live free or die state. They'll say, well, it was at least one time. They understand it, and that's a difference from California.
And when you say versed in the Constitution, versed in the idea of limited government?
That's right. And the Constitution is, as Jefferson said, tie it down with the chains of the Constitution, meaning the government, so that it protects liberty.
So New Hampshire won the vote. What states were second and third?
Wyoming was second and Montana was third. So there's a little bit of an east-west division there, but New Hampshire was a decisive winner.
And how many people have moved?
So far, in terms of the number of people who have actually moved, about 200 have moved to date. There are 256 people who lived in New Hampshire prior to the vote. The plan of the project originally was that we seek 20,000 participants, and participation means you agree to move to the chosen state within 5 years of reaching 20,000 like commitments.
You just sign up, say I will.
Yes, say I'll do that, and the process for selecting the state was that the first 5,000 people to sign on the dotted line would vote, and they took a vote. And the winner of that vote was New Hampshire. You could opt out of states also, and so we lost some people who opted out of New Hampshire. In fact, I was one of them.
I don't see what you mean. You lost.
You're
here.
I'm here. You're right. Yeah, and it's a confusing thing. Why would a guy who opted out of New Hampshire show up? And what happened in my case is a month after the vote, my wife and I and our 2 children came here to take a tour of New Hampshire. We had been removed as FreeState Project participants because we had opted out. And we took a tour for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and drove around the state and learned 2 things. One was we liked it, we liked the people, and the other was we found a town that we wanted to live in. And so we decided that we were ready to commit again to move, this time knowing it was the state of New Hampshire that had been chosen, so we signed up again. I may be the only people that have joined the project twice.
And I was annoyed that you invited me to speak in February, thinking, why? February? Are you kidding me? Why is it? And then someone explained it to me.
Yeah, there's a funny reason that we did that, and I thought, well, we want to have another event, one that's a little more like a convention. Every year we have the Porcupine Freedom Festival. It's campy, outdoorsy, summertime. It's a party, right? But we want to have something where we can discuss, we can bring in speakers, and have forums and things like that. And I thought, why don't we do that in the winter? Because part of the purpose is bringing people here for the purpose of showing them the state, saying, hey, can you consider moving here? Well, if we do that in February, and they're willing to sign on the dotted line, they know what the weather's like. So here they are, and here you are.
And the climate's really not that bad.
It's not. I like to say the welcome is so warm we don't even notice the weather.
That if you can spend time here in February, you can live here.
Yeah, this is as bad as it gets. And it's not bad.
So people move. You talk about changing the political climate. Now, libertarian tends to mean we just want to leave people alone. But I would think when you use language like that, your language, that some of the local politicians would say, who are these people invading my state?
That's been a very real concern. And there's been some discussion of that. People say, oh, these are outsiders, these are carpetbaggers, these are invaders. And the personal experiences of those of us who have moved here have been very different from that. The welcome has been very warm, and there's been widespread success with people forming relationships and building bonds with politicians, with neighbors, with civic organizations, and really being accepted into the culture, not looked at as someone who wants to come and ruin things. And certainly there's skepticism. Everybody's concerned, well, who are these people? But once we get to know them, once they get to know us.
And what kind of things do they say?
Before they meet us or after?
Before they meet you.
I read a newspaper article. Before I moved here, I built a house in Keene. And I read this AP newspaper article that jokingly said, so what are all these pot-smoking, prostitute-loving? I don't remember all the funny phrases, right? But they spelled out the stereotype. And I took that to my next-door neighbors, and I read that phrase, and they said, which one are you?
Of the 5,000 initially signed up, are there more now?
Yeah. After the vote, the count was about 4,500. Since then,
Some
another
opted out.
3,000 people have signed up. So we're at about 7,500 right now.
And do you really think 7,000 people will do it?
Right now, they're not committed because we haven't achieved 20,000 signatures. What we have done, though, is rolled out a more aggressive kind of version of the plan, which we called the First 1,000 Project. We finished that in December of 2006. And that was to get 1,000 people committed to moving by the end of 2008. That project was successful and completed. Now, I don't know that every one of those 1,000 people will show up, but I hear time and time and time again, even this weekend here at the Liberty Forum, people saying, I'll ask them, so when are you showing up? And without missing a beat, they give me a date. So people are coming. And I don't know.
You help them find a place to live or make suggestions?
We make suggestions. We have tools. We have volunteers who help point people to job resources. There are a couple of Free State Project participants who are realtors. So they show people around the state when they come on tours. Some of the tools that maybe are most effective are people just coming here themselves. We have the Porcupine Freedom Festival and the New Hampshire Liberty Forum for the purpose of making a convenient time for people who want to move to come. And many of them this weekend are going out and looking at houses and looking for jobs and going on interviews right here, right now.
I'll add as well that we have a really strong community in New Hampshire already, and people who have moved here, all they have to do is let people know in advance that they're coming, and between 5 and 20 people will show up to help them move in.
The pizza and the strong arms.
Right.
And I don't know if 20,000, if your number is correct, but let's say you start to achieve more of a critical mass, whatever it is. What would the ideal state be like?
Well, I think there are some big issues that we need to work on. One of the biggest is education. The public school system is a government-dominated monopoly, and for that reason it doesn't respond to the customers, the students, and their parents. So we think that we need a more competitive system that has the right incentives to actually do what it's supposed to do, to educate students. So we think we need to move towards a fully private and competitive school system. And that, I think, will have all sorts of effects in bringing up a new generation of people who can reason, can think logically, and they will start to think in a more rational way about other policies.
When you say private and competitive, competitive can mean that the government still funds it, but the money's attached to the kid, and they can take it to government schools or private schools. Private tends to mean the government doesn't fund it.
There are a bunch of different options out there, and I think there's a diversity of opinions within the Free State Project. One view would be that the schools would be privately owned and for profit, but then the government would provide the money for the students. Then some views say that the government shouldn't provide money. So there are all sorts of views there, but so long as we move towards a more competitive system that works for the student, I think we're moving in the right direction.
What beside education?
Well, there are issues such as medical marijuana. We think it's just as a humane issue, it's important not to essentially allow the government to kill people by denying them medicine. There are medical benefits to marijuana, and people should be allowed to use it if they believe that it's in their best interest.
Why just medical marijuana? Don't we own our own bodies? Shouldn't it be our choice if we wish to poison ourselves even?
I agree with that. I think consenting adults should be allowed to ultimately take any drug. But we're pragmatists, I think, most of us, and we like to start small and then get bigger.
There might, too, be a distinction drawn between what you might think of as an extreme viewpoint and a fairly relatively moderate viewpoint. And we like to include people who want to move significantly in a more freedom-oriented direction without getting into the minute details of the extreme versus the relatively moderate. we phrase in general terms, the ultimate goal is the creation of a society in which the maximum role of government is the protection of life, liberty, and property. That's a resonating American, freedom. It's mom and pop, like in motherhood and apple pie and freedom, and this is all good stuff, right?
Yeah, everyone's for that.
Everyone's for that, really, and that is a very American thing. Some surveys have indicated that there's a very significant contingent of the population that are quote-unquote libertarian. It doesn't reflect necessarily in voting behavior, for example, but that's the way a lot of people feel.
So what's wrong with the rest of America? America seems to be doing pretty well. America is generally free. Economy is booming.
Well, there are a number of problems we think with
Where should we start?
Right, where do you start? Where do you start?
Yeah, where do you start with that? I mean, a lot of people probably aren't quote unquote feeling the pain. But in the last, since September 11th, a lot has been blamed on September 11th of infringements on personal liberties, and there's been an economic cost to that. There's been war, which has, right or wrong, and trying to solve the problem or not, cost a lot of money. That translates to taxes at some point. And people feel that. The economy feels that. There have been civil liberties measures, the Transportation Security Administration, Real ID, the USA Patriot Act, the laundry list of acronyms is long. Department of Homeland Security, all this government reorganization has in some ways affected all of us. Not everybody feels it on a day-to-day basis, but I believe there is a very real reduction in freedom that's been going on even for 100 years. The taxes are more than 10 times higher today than what they were 100 years ago, and so on and so forth. And it's accelerated in the last decade.
Well, I would say America is doing all right, but could do so much better, and I think that's what we're about. We think that ultimately we think this is kind of a historic opportunity to turn things around. When instead of seeing freedom get incrementally eroded, we've been doing everything we can to work on Washington, D.C. and try to get them to understand how free markets work, why people's property rights are so important, but they don't seem to get it. And so by concentrating on one state, we think, well, we can build a free society there and show the rest of the country sort of how it's done.
And when you talk that way, I think of the Ayn Rand novel, Atlas Shrugged, and John Galt and some other achievers went off to a new place to start a new society. You kind of think of yourselves that way?
There's a yes and no. There's maybe a common ideology there, a common vision of freedom, but there's a very different character involved with this project in that the people tend to be very cooperative and very productive. They want to build something. This isn't about, it is about individualism in the respect that it's about individual liberty, but it isn't about yanking the rug out from under America or New Hampshire. This is about making a productive, positive transition to a society that respects individual liberty. And we can work together and live together in a state that is truly beautiful and free without having the maybe attitude of selfishness and rugged and just leave me alone, isolationism.
It probably should go without saying, but we're not all trying to hole up somewhere and just shut out the world or anything like that. It's about engaging with civil society and with the government that's already here.
I live on the end of a residential street in a residential neighborhood, right across the street from the high school in my town.
And your point being?
I'm not trying to get away. I'm trying to plug in, I guess.
And I don't even know if Ayn Rand was clearly arguing that, when there are only two ways to do things, forced or voluntary. And voluntary doesn't mean you want to hole yourself up. It just means you want to mix it up with other people in ways that benefit both of you.
And that's the emphasis, is voluntary cooperation, not the use of force, particularly by government.
So you kind of sound like the founders. You're starting over.
In a way, we are.
And Thomas Jefferson said it's the natural progress of things for government to gain and liberty to yield. So,
And I believe that's happened, is happening now, and that's why we're here.
so let's say you sign up for the Free State Project and you come here. Then you're part of a cult, part of a political party.
Certainly not, and in fact, the Free State Project does not get involved in taking positions on issues, endorsing candidates or legislation. The Free State Project's mission is to attract pro-freedom activists to move to New Hampshire, where they, emphasis on the word they, will work to create a society in which the maximum role of government is the protection of life, liberty, and property. Once you move here, it is your job, your freedom, to sort of follow that mission. You can figure out where to live on your own. We don't tell you how to do that. And you can figure out, do you want to work on a single issue or work with a particular group? The Free State Project doesn't do any of that work at all. We're more of a recruiting, facilitating migration organization.
If somebody votes for a politician you don't like, you won't kick them out?
No, of course not. And they do that. We have people who are members of probably every political party. In fact, as a matter of trivia, we recently had a participant who moved here and was elected to the State House of Representatives here in New Hampshire, and he ran and won as a Democrat.
What's the phrase you use, freedom activists?
Pro-freedom activists or pro-liberty activists?
You use the phrase activist. Why not just pro-freedom people? What does activist mean?
That's a key word, and it's important because we don't just seek people who will move here and do nothing or just move here and even vote. We're looking for people who want to work, who want to do something actively, that's an activist, to promote freedom. And they can choose what they'd like to do, but we want them to go to work. Whether it be lobbying legislation or there are other forms of activism. We had recently a nationally syndicated talk show relocate their show to New Hampshire. They're very pro-freedom people, and they did that as part of their participation. They haven't gotten involved, at least yet, in politics. But they're there in New Hampshire spreading the message of freedom as their form of activism.
So things have changed already?
Absolutely. And that was a bit unexpected. The original plan was get 20,000, then move. But having had a couple of hundred people move, we've had quite a string of maybe unexpected successes. A couple of years ago, as an example, a Free Stater wrote a bill to eliminate one of the major requirements for homeschooling, and that is every year that they would have to submit their curriculum to the government, and or a school, but submit the curriculum. That requirement no longer exists. She wrote that bill and found a sponsor, had it introduced, saw it, and many Free State Project participants were involved in the process, kind of coached it through the House and the Senate and back to conference committee, and there's all the details. And this was work, it was doing. And that bill was passed into law and signed by the governor. So there's one example of a change. We can identify at least 7 figures, and maybe more, worth of local spending that we can cite the Free State Project participants who swung votes on that to reduce the spending, to cut stuff out of budgets. Well, another example was a Free State Project participant who was elected to the State House of Representatives a few months ago. That's just another in the string of success stories.
I should point out as well that there's really no strong distinction between Free Staters and other pro-freedom people once they move to New Hampshire. There's already a big libertarian pro-freedom movement in New Hampshire, and they've gotten energized because of the Free Staters coming in. They work together all the time on major issues at the state and local levels.
One of the things that happened recently was the federal government passed a Real ID provision.
And Real ID means?
Real ID are provisions that the federal government has set up that would require all the states to have uniform driver's licenses, and there are implications even with possibly a single database, certainly data commonality, RFID maybe, but a lot of data that's on a single, that will be readily accepted, basically national ID card. Here in New Hampshire there was an effort to completely reject that, and we led the way on that effort. And because of Free State Project participants who moved here, that bill passed through the State House of Representatives. Now, unfortunately, the federal government sent the big thugs They sent Judd Gregg with money and influence and got that killed in the Senate. However, the fight goes on. New Hampshire has not taken the money, and that issue will be revisited again this year. But New Hampshire led the way on saying no to Real ID. Another example of good things that happened here, it's not necessarily attributable to Free Staters, it was insanely popular, was the response to the New London, Connecticut eminent domain case. That went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. As a result of that, it galvanized the population, I suppose. And many states considered legislation to restrict eminent domain. In some states, it went over lukewarm. In fact, California's initiative failed. In New Hampshire, the population overwhelmingly supported amending the Constitution to prohibit that very thing from happening. So the culture here is very freedom-friendly already, and we are energizing that in some respects.
And that passed.
Yeah, that went to the voters. 85% passed.
Now, here's an odd question. As I look at libertarian gatherings, I prefer the phrase classical liberal,
Yeah.
but it's mostly men.
Mm-hmm.
I think of the leaders of spreading these ideas, it's largely female. Ayn Rand, Virginia Postrel, Margaret Thatcher. Who's moving?
Everybody.
Couples, men?
Absolutely. I'm married and have 2 young children. There's a lot of families that have moved, and that has surprised even me. We've had couples, we've had retirees move, a lot of college students have been moving, or younger people. There are several couples who have moved here and started families here just in the last couple of years. We had one that adopted a child from Estonia. Another couple had a baby, in fact the one who was elected to the State House of Representatives, I think, the day before or 2 days before the election, had a baby. So these are real people. It's families, men, women, older, younger, some professionals, some students. It's all across the board. It is really a snapshot of America, I suppose.
And you talk about the people from Estonia. I noticed that a disproportionate number of people who come up to me and say, "Thank you for your books explaining freedom." They're from former Soviet bloc countries.
Yeah.
They get how well-intended government can be oppressive.
That's one of the ironies of this situation that we find ourselves in. And I travel all over the world as a pilot, and I've been to many communist countries, and I've been to many other notoriously free places like Hong Kong and Singapore. And the trend around the world, in a lot of respects, is influenced upward in a more freedom-oriented direction, partly because of the example that America set. And then here in America, the former pace setter, right, we're kind of falling down on the job. And the trend here is going downhill. But a lot of people
Thomas Jefferson said the
That's
natural
right.
progress of things.
That's right, that's right.
So we have models of failure around. I like to joke. It's good that we have Cuba and North Korea and now
absolutely.
Venezuela and maybe the post office and the motor vehicles division to show what an all-government state is like.
Right.
But you're doing something different. You're trying to create a model of
The good
success.
model. It's the counterpart. It's easy to build a bad model, and people do it all the time. We want to build a good model. It's partly so we can enjoy it. But we found that many people are interested in this, not just because they want to live free. You would think, back to the libertine comment, that somebody would say, hey, I want to go there because I want to fill in the blank. But many people are interested in this, not just to enjoy the benefits of freedom, but to demonstrate them, to build a model for America and the rest of the world to see again as America once was.
Thank you very much. I wish you luck. I mean, it sounds like you guys are doing intelligent things, and it seems like a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
But God bless experiments. I don't even believe in God, but God bless experiments.
We'll take it.